Vector grid stable. Optical decoys holding. No anomalies within 600,000 clicks, said Jorvin Thass without turning his head, fingers gliding over the shield modulation array with surgical intent. Varric Holst didn't respond immediately. He stood near the viewport, hands clasped behind his back, studying the foreign dark pressed up against their hull. The black wasn't empty. It was anticipating. He could feel it, like the breath before an executioner's blade dropped. 12 ships of the United Terran Concord hovered at the heliopause like monoliths without purpose, each one humming with dormant threat, each one playing dumb. Fleet posture remains non-aggressive, Threncaldus added dryly from the ops well. Not that it'll matter if they get too close. They'll choke on their own assumptions before we ever speak. Holst finally replied. That's the objective. The air inside the UTS endowment was bone dry, filtered too many times through recursive micropurifiers, giving it the quality of sterilized paper. No ambient noise bled from systems, nothing clattered, nothing rattled. Every crewman moved like he'd been rehearsing for a funeral. Long-range scatter confirmed, Arvik Knoll's voice broke the weight in the room. Ascendancy signal bursts triple-layer encrypted. Non-rhythmic cadence. That's pre-contact protocol. They're close. Holst's jaw shifted slightly, but his eyes never left the outer pane. He wasn't waiting for a message. He was waiting for a mistake. Above him, the fleet's internal HUD flickered across the upper edge of the bridge dome. Configured in nested cubes of data, the display pulsed faintly, casting each face of Holst's cheekbones in rotating shades of surgical blue and acid green. A new ping. Dominion Fleet Vector 6, a 98 confirmed breach trajectory, inbound from Oort Shelf margin. They're faster than we projected, Caldus muttered, adjusting parameters. They're arrogant, Holst corrected, tone flat, which is faster than light when undisturbed. Outside, nothing moved, and yet things had already begun. Behind their projected stillness, Earth's diplomatic fleet wasn't armed in the conventional sense. It carried no siege weaponry, no visible turrets, and no high-energy heat traces. But the endowment held technologies that couldn't be modeled by the enemy's threat assessment algorithms. That was by design. Holst's voice was barely more than breath. Engage subsensory layering, Thass nodded, disseminating field haze in slow roll pattern. From the lower hull of the endowment, invisible packets began transmitting across space. They weren't signals, not in the traditional sense. These were engineered distortions, intercepted not by receivers, but by instincts. A nudge to a predator's spine, a wrong note in a perfect chord. Holst turned toward the rear of the bridge, approaching the core display hub. He didn't like relying on digital prompts, but these weren't ordinary consoles. Refraction-based neurometrics filled the central pit, a suspended sphere where thought and pattern intersected through complex field resonators. You didn't look at it, you understood it, like reading the emotion on a man's face without hearing a word. Enemy fleet vector is staggered, Thass noted, scanning the divergence feed. They're leading with command class, 3 carriers followed by relay ships, no flank escort yet. They're baiting a challenge, Arvik said. No, Holst said, stepping forward into the resonance field. They're inviting applause. His fingers drifted through the sphere's edge, and the interface shifted with him, predicting his intent, cross-referencing emotion with threat layers. Dozens of embedded matrices swirled beneath the visual layer. A lesser mind would drown in it. Holst had trained his synapses not to blink. Thren, begin linguistic seeding, he ordered. Layered below detectable spectrum. I want it drifting through their psycho-interpreter feeds like static, unseen but misaligned. Caldus's eyebrows lifted, amused. We're going subtle then? We're going surgical, Holst clarified. Start with the reverberation leximes. Add shadow reflexives to the phoneme pattern. I want them parsing riddles while they try to aim. Caldus tapped sequences on the curved control array in front of him. Linguistic payload loaded. Initiating drift. Now. Onboard each ship of the Terran formation, systems calibrated their payloads. Not warheads, not beams, but complex psychological artifacts designed to ride inside ambient transmissions, stowaways on the backs of procedural greetings, diplomatic codes, and automated positioning beacons. They'll hear us before they see us, Caldus murmured. They won't understand us before they fall apart, Holst corrected. There's a difference. A proximity chime chirped in the upper tier. The bridge darkened as the interface rebalanced brightness curves. Ascendancy lead ship had entered detection range. Their vessels didn't slow. Why would they? Director, came Thas's voice, cooler now. Ascendancy carrier Vexora has locked guidance. No weapons hot, but their arrays are sweeping us like we're a reflection they can't resolve. Holst walked back to the main viewport. No one else dared speak. The Vexora was enormous, but it felt distant. Not in size, but in comprehension. They thought they were approaching a diplomat. He spoke without turning. Begin passive inversion. Confirmed, said Arvik. Inversion grid syncing with external data. Refracted overlays engaged. Now the real game began. Terran ships flickered, not visibly, but conceptually. To Ascendancy optics, their positions seemed offset. Their edges became recursive, blurring into each other, appearing to occupy overlapping spaces. Caldus exhaled. Telemetry feedback beginning. Their scanners just started bleeding. The enemy would now see duplicates, reflections of reflections, ghosts where form should be. The Terrans still hadn't moved. Not a whisper from engines, not a broadcast voice, not a maneuver. Holst's final command was barely audible. Mark time for Echo Fall Sync. We initiate when they request clarification, not before. Thas grinned faintly, eyes never leaving his console. And when they do? Then, Holst said, turning his eyes toward the growing cloud of arrivals, they'll realize we already answered. The HUD shimmered above them. New data spiked, Ascendancy fleet stacking. Confusion would soon lead to recalibration. Recalibration would force communication. And communication was the trap. Just as predicted, a ping struck their buffer array. Ascendancy command requesting signal protocol confirmation. Holst didn't blink. Prepare the first tier loop. Begin with oblique phrases. Arvik nodded. Payload configured. Ready on your mark. Holst stepped forward again, casting one last look into the overlapping quantum array, like gazing into a broken hall of mirrors. Deploy! As the first loop transmitted, the Terran formation adjusted nothing in posture, but the shape of the battlefield had already warped beyond recovery for anyone who couldn't comprehend what was being weaponized. And the Dominion still didn't understand the question. Run it again, Holst said, eyes fixed on the display node suspended in the center of the analysis chamber. Arvik Knoll didn't argue. With a single gesture, the laser-threaded interface bloomed open, layers of fragmented ascendancy data unfolding like a dissection table. Streams of symbols curled outward, each character subtly vibrating as if resisting interpretation. A stutter in rhythm, not error, camouflage. The chamber's lighting pulsed low, synced to frequency intervals buried within the intercepted signal. The air was dry and ionized, like the interior of a charged capacitor. It stung the skin in odd rhythms. Knoll's personal choice. He worked better when discomfort sharpened focus. I've triple parsed the burst, Knoll said. This isn't protocol corruption. It's deliberate misalignment. Time codes are staggered. Phrase patterns drift out of linguistic cohesion after 4 cycles, then loop back under an inverted checksum. It's feeding false clarity. Compression layering? Holst asked without looking up. Only on surface bursts, Knoll replied. Deeper core uses recursive frequency detuning. They're hiding something underneath, something that pretends to be something else. Holst nodded once. That's where we start then. Behind them, Thren Caldus leaned back in his station chair, fingers steepled as the scroll of ascendancy syntax continued rotating through the peripheral display threads. They're broadcasting diplomacy, he said, but only on the surface. Sublayers engineered to embed instability into our AI parsing modules. A thought infection, Knoll added, low-grade but surgical, would slip past any routine error correction net. Holst's mouth drew into a faint line. Someone in their fleet anticipated a non-military confrontation? Caldus smirked without humor. Then someone over there is smarter than they look. The heads-up interface shifted as Thas entered the room, sleeves rolled, expression unreadable. Rurin's lead vessel just switched comms to dual cascade. They're layering diplomatic intentions over what looks like Adaptive testing code. Describe it, Holst said. It's not bait. It's... Thies paused, rechecking his feed. Response probing. They're throwing standardized queries with deliberate syntax drift to see how our response systems realign. Like they're watching our reflexes instead of the content. Testing for automation, Noel concluded. Or looking for deviations from baseline diplomatic AI, Caldus added. Holst turned toward the central interface, activating his input node. Then let's give them something to measure. He began constructing the first reply, a sequence formatted to appear like a standard greeting, wrapped in human-coded protocol, but seeded with data loops that would fragment any predictive analysis run against it. The message would seem polite, it would be grammatically correct, and it would ruin their translators. Attach reflexive shunts, Holst said. If they parse too deeply, it flips the meaning. I want them asking themselves what they missed rather than what we said. Caldus stood and moved to the side console, preparing a linguistic phasing loop. Want it embedded in high-frequency diplomatic veneer or neutral code? Soft aggro diplomacy, Holst replied. Imply we expected their test, then look surprised they're doing it. The message deployed into buffer. No acknowledgement returned, but that wasn't the goal. It wasn't about reply, it was about consequence. Already the Ascendancy's primary carrier shifted lateral trajectory, a movement too deliberate to be random. Someone had blinked. Contact in 3 minutes, Thas announced, if they maintain speed. We'll have phase feedback before that, Noel muttered. This channel's too clean. Holst keyed a secondary display, and the command network's pulse tree sprang to life. Thousands of sub-processes mapping pathways between inbound communication vectors and their own response matrix. He watched as small deviations sparked across the topography. There, he pointed, third-order offset. That's not latency, it's a deliberate dampening buffer. They're trying to bleed our response cues across time to see if we lag. Which means they've encountered temporal threading before, Noel said. They're gauging it. Caldus pulled up another string of language packets, muttering to himself before speaking. Inverting signal trees. I'm going to pack a fracture loop into the next response. If they try to reconstruct meaning based on prefix logic, it'll reverse context and produce a diplomatic insult hidden inside a compliment. Thas arched a brow. You're really good at pissing people off politely. It's a gift, Caldus murmured. The heads-up cue blinked twice. An incoming burst. Not a reply, but another feeler. Holst leaned forward, watching the waveform. Subtle power increase in their transceiver field, Thas noted. That's a scan ramp. They're trying to pressure react the signal, Holst observed. They want to see if we protect it. Do we? Noel asked, almost too casually. Holst nodded. Barely, just enough to suggest we're hiding something without admitting we are. Caldus smiled, layering ambiguity like varnish. Another burst followed, tighter, faster. This one carried tone modulation embedded inside the header code. Caldus caught it first. They're trying to emote. Thas let out a quiet grunt. Emotion emulation? That's new. Holst turned slowly. Not emulation, manipulation. They're seeding our response systems with mock pathos cues. Their message implies remorse, an attempt to trigger empathy responses in adaptive diplomacy modules. Classic bait, Noel said, but refined. Caldus looked up from his console. Then we reply in turn. Not with sympathy, but empathy they can't decode, Holst approved. Frame it with inverted emotional mapping. Structure it as if we regret their misunderstanding. Which, Thas added, will imply they're wrong. Exactly. Caldus typed rapidly, his fingers dancing across the shaped keys as the message compiled. Then the transmission was pushed through auxiliary buffer nodes, scrambled, restructured, compressed through a multi-vector line, and deployed. The response delay was 5 seconds, then a flicker, then another. Thas checked readings, his jaw tightening. Lead Ascendancy ship just shifted orientation. Their comms array is now facing us fully. I think we passed their threshold. Noel glanced at Holst. What do we deploy next? Holst's answer was immediate. Nothing. Everyone froze. We wait, he continued. We gave them 3 puzzles. They'll pick the wrong one to solve. That's when we apply the real pressure. A new indicator lit up on the board. Back channel trigger, not from enemy input, but from their own internal filter net. Phase distortion was starting to affect baseline logic inside the Ascendancy's language tree. Caldus's grin was sharp now. They're folding in on themselves. Beautiful. Thas ran a diagnostic. Command-linked vessels now running asynchronous response queries. They're out of sync with their own network. Holst didn't smile, he rarely did, but his voice lowered, words precise as a scalpel. Then it's time to plan what happens when they try to recover. Drift anomaly, 1.3 variance in gravitational curl at zero elevation, reported substrategist Korvek, seated rigid in the forward ops of the Vexora. His spines retracted, stiffening vertically along his skull ridge, a gesture Vatek Roran had long since learned to interpret as unease. "Hold formation," Roran responded, his voice devoid of friction. "Calibration was expected to bend that far. They're manipulating our optics." The heads-up projection floating in front of him flickered briefly. 12 Terran vessels sat unmoved across Sol's outer ring, their surfaces catching distant starlight and redirecting it at oblique vectors. The effect was subtle, reflections folding back on themselves, shapes blending into mirrored cousins. No two sensor sweeps gave the same returns. "Target telemetry recycling across 3 cycles now," Korvek muttered. "Their positions won't anchor. Every sweep shows a shift." "Not shift," Roran corrected. "Misdirection. They're feeding us our own expectations." The bridge lights of the Vexora remained low, save for the reactive surface panels glowing amber red as data pulsed in layered strings. Cold circulated from ventilation shafts along the chamber's walls, filtered through biological scramblers designed to simulate arid atmospheric environments, favored by Roran's caste. "Commander," said strategist Ulith from below-deck comms, "fleet units report diverging results on vector analysis. We're looking at 12 hostiles, maybe 24, possibly 9. Roran raised his hand without turning. "How many do you believe we see?" There was hesitation. Then Ulith replied, "1 ship, 1,000 angles." Exactly. Roran didn't voice it. The humans weren't hiding. They were confusing. "Initiate optical compression," he ordered. "Collapse our inbound scans to zero reference and isolate for non-native drift patterns. Strip the backdrop. I want signals that shouldn't exist." Below the command platform, teams moved. The Dominion's battle fleet stretched across a crescent formation, each vessel layered with iridescent shielding that shimmered beneath interference bursts like heated oil over glass. Meant to intimidate, but intimidation failed in the face of unexplainable calm. Still, Roran pressed forward. "Begin breach protocol. Notify the 7th that their reserves may be required if Terrans escalate." A beat. "Clarify," Ulith prompted. Roran adjusted his wristband, scrolling input channels through tactile rings. "I said if they escalate." He wanted that uncertainty transmitted, not out of carelessness, but calculation. Let the Dominion prepare, but hesitate. Overconfidence had defeated more legions than strategy ever had. Heads-up threads twisted in front of him again. This time something flickered beneath the telemetry, a subtle shimmer running against the data grain. Not interference. Redirection. Like a reflection that didn't match the viewer. "Run null thought protocol on feed 7, Roran commanded. "Clean the loop. Look for feedback not sourced from our own systems." Korvek complied. His fingers moved quickly, his claws tapping specific pads with controlled rhythm. A thin sound trickled into the chamber from the translator array. A linguistic anomaly mimicking Dominion diplomatic cadence, but layered with inverted inflection. Words sounded correct, but their emotional structure was reversed. Korvek hissed low. "They're speaking our language backward." "No," Roran said, leaning in. "They're teaching us our own fear." The projection's outer ring began folding inward, images fragmenting, then recombining. The Terran ships hadn't moved, yet their presence swelled, an illusion tied not to thrust, but to how the mind parsed shape and direction. Roran felt the edges of the room compress slightly, a side effect of sensory tension creeping into conscious analysis. "Set internal dampers to neutral," he said quietly, "and instruct auxiliary minds to monitor thought deviation. I want complete logs of every crewman's interpretation of the incoming signals." "You think the message is psychological?" Korvek asked. No, Roran answered. I think it's surgical. The Dominion fleet's approach continued. Their ships rotated into combat formation drift patterns, standard practice when probing unknown fleets. But their adversaries still held neutral posture. That's what struck Roran most. The lack of escalation. No maneuvers, no vocal challenge, no gesture of dismissal. It was as if they hadn't even noticed the Dominion's arrival. Zero response, Eulith reported. Even passive scan deflections minimal. It's as if they're waiting for us to declare our own irrelevance. Roran said nothing for several seconds. Then finally, they want us to think we're still leading. And we're not. Look again. Eulith blinked, then froze. The Terran fleet, while unmoved in coordinate space, now registered differential masses. Their ships were gaining weight according to Dominion telemetry, without absorbing matter, without deploying equipment. That can't be real, Korvek whispered. It isn't, Roran confirmed. They're overwriting how we measure. Every scanner across the Dominion formation had begun showing erratic densities, false mass surges, phantom systems that didn't exist but passed all diagnostic checks. The fleet had crossed a threshold, and reality itself had started behaving differently around the Terran formation. Pull back our frontline ships by 6,000 clicks, Roran ordered, pacing forward. But don't retreat. Let it look like tactical repositioning. He needed distance, not for survival, for clarity. Transmit an all-fleet adjustment signal, Eulith said. Shall we advise recalibration of main targeting arrays? Not yet. Let confusion ferment. If we correct too fast, they'll adjust to our awareness. There was a pause. Korvek broke it. Why haven't they fired? They already did, Roran muttered. We're just discovering where the wound is. From the rear of the bridge, a low chime pulsed through the systems, another looped message from the Terran ships. This time, no words, just tonal rhythms, spiraling in on themselves, non-threatening, but undeniably alien in structure. Korvek watched his console flicker. That sound, it shouldn't trigger language centers, but I'm interpreting it as a question. Roran nodded slowly. It is a question, one we're not meant to answer. He leaned closer to the control surface, eyes narrowing at the Terran signature overlay. They've baited us into a formation, fed our command systems data with embedded variants. They're learning how we react, not how we fight. Eulith's voice dropped. You're saying this is a behavioral mapping net? I'm saying, Roran replied, they've made us their test case. Behind him, across the Dominion fleet, small discrepancies began to surface. One ship reported heat distortion where no energy source existed. Another detected false echoes from its own stern. Not attacks, just fractures in expected reality. This is no war, Roran said, each syllable heavier than the last. It's a rewritten equation. And somewhere, on a ship that had not moved, Varric Holst was still watching. Deploy it. Varric Holst didn't look at anyone when he spoke. He didn't need to. His voice was as calm as an equation already solved. Sharp, cold, undeniable. His fingertips moved in measured arcs over the interface node, activating the broadcast lattice. Across the UTS Endowment's command sphere, circuits hummed not with force, but with meaning. The room contracted slightly as echo falls spooled up. The air thinned, not physically but linguistically, as if the environment itself grew cautious of what was about to be spoken into it. Signal fracture arrays are locked, reported Arvik Knoll, eyes narrowed on the tactical cascade, a heads-up mosaic of coiling vectors and language trees. Cross-modulating every semantic layer through 3 paradox branches, no two systems in their fleet will hear the same message the same way. Good, Holst replied. Confusion will generate more damage than clarity. Behind them, Thren Kaldis adjusted the rhythm oscillator, his voice quiet, deliberate. I've aligned the core phrasing. Each syllable shifts half a lexemic tier every cycle. Their translators won't adapt fast enough. Meaning will fall out of sync mid-sentence. Target the fleet's psychological mesh first, Holst instructed, then cascade downward into tactical memory stores. A column of light erupted within the command sphere, tall, colorless, silent, made not of photons but instruction. The light wasn't seen so much as felt, like the after-image of an answer you didn't remember asking. From this nexus, the weapon would ride, not through circuitry, not along plasma conduits or kinetic channels, but directly into cognition. Initial phrase sequence uploaded, Knoll confirmed. Dissemination begins now. The broadcast launched, not as a single stream, but as a sequence of interpretive viruses, each embedded in different resonance carriers. Sound, EM patterning, compressed sense stimuli, neural suggestion matrices. The Dominion fleet received the first pulse within seconds. Not through their primary comms, but through the periphery. Ambient systems, background memory checks, passive threat indicators. Anywhere minds and machines blurred. Rurin blinked. "Commander," Korvac said abruptly, I don't recognize the layout." "What layout?" Rurin asked, but his voice faltered as he viewed the readout. Their tactical display had redrawn itself. Not distorted, translated. The fleet's ships now appeared as abstract glyphs, some upside down, others duplicated. A label appeared above the Vexora in Dominionic. Error, systemic agency, unclear. "It's attacking our cognition lattice," Ulith breathed. "The message, it's not directed at us, it's directed through us." On board hundreds of Dominion vessels, crewmen suddenly paused. Words stopped making sense. Orders became recursive. Systems returned values they'd never been told to measure. Even gravity sensors, entirely mechanical, started displaying inverted mass tables. And all the while, the Terran fleet didn't move. Back on the endowment, Holst stood perfectly still, watching the results unfold. "Now deploy the anchor phrase." Caldus complied. "Fractal logic loops injected. This line will split understanding on impact." The phrase was 5 words, simple if spoken aloud. "This is not war, correction." But each Dominion vessel heard it differently. To some, it was an apology from an impossible future. To others, a command from their own past selves. To a few, it was a demand without grammar, without direction, without source. And in that ambiguity, cohesion cracked. "Cognition bleed accelerating," reported Knoll. "Their commanders are issuing contradictory instructions. Fleet-wide AI arbitration has triggered conflict resolutions internally. They've begun misidentifying each other as simulated threats." "That's the hook," Holst said. "Now spike the loop." Caldus hit the trigger. The message rebroadcast itself across every Dominion ship with minor variations. 10,000 subtle inconsistencies designed to disintegrate consensus. No single entity could validate it against the others. Every mind experienced a different truth. Consensus broke. Orders stalled. Coordination shattered. "Commander," Korvac gasped aboard the Vexora, "primary helm controls are requesting verification from our own memory stores." "I tried to revalidate chain of command. My access ID has become a logic error." Rurin clenched his fists. "What are they doing?" "They're convincing our systems we were never meant to receive this data," Ulith replied, stunned. The Dominion fleet drifted, beautiful and meaningless. Lights blinked across hulls like fireflies trapped in a jar with no lid. Rurin stared at the Terran formation, jaw tight, as the only remaining readable message scrolled across every heads-up feed. It didn't flicker, it didn't scream. It simply read, "We recommend retreat for preservation of your command integrity. This is not war, it is miscalculation, and we have corrected it." Every Dominion ship processed the message. None could agree on what had been corrected. Back in the endowment, Holst sat, not slumped, not relaxed, just aligned. "All fleet units confirm," Thas's voice came from the upper tier. "No counteroffensive. 17 ships have lost centralized cohesion. 5 have disabled core power. 15 more drifting. Remaining fleet is disengaging. No damage reports. No weapons discharged," Thas said. "Not even by us." Holst exhaled through his nose. "Then that's the closest thing we'll get to a conversation." A final display sequence unfolded. Waveform decay tracked the Dominion's retreat in nonverbal metrics. Fragmentation speed, memory loop back duration, contextual breakdown. The numbers didn't tell a story. They exposed an equation too complex to recite. Holst stood and gave a single order. "Deactivate echo fall." Knoll complied. "Tapering all outputs." Across the system, the signal folded in on itself and vanished. No triumph followed. No applause, just space. And the memory of what language can do when shaped not to convey, but to unmake. They didn't fire. They fractured, said Director Varric Holst, hands folded neatly in his lap. The room was spherical, stone-textured, with no identifiable seams or corners. Diffuse amber lighting spilled from narrow grooves behind the curved seating tiers above him. 23 observers. No titles. No introductions. Only black attire and infrared privacy veils over their faces. This was not a court. It was a review. Unrecorded, unmapped, and absolute. "We didn't ask for casualties," a voice said from the far right tier. Modulated, old. "You delivered cognitive collapse." Holst's gaze lifted slightly toward the sound. "We didn't design Echo Fall for casualties. Its framework exists to avoid them." "That isn't avoidance. It's annihilation of meaning," said another. A low chime pulsed once from the center. Authorization for Holst to respond. He inhaled. "We intercepted layers of ascendancy semantic structures months in advance. Their syntax engines were starting to adapt to diplomatic neural attack strategies. Echo Fall was a preemptive correction to maintain parity. You redefined diplomacy." "No," Holst replied. "They did when they weaponized empathy triggers." Heads-up feeds shimmered across the inner perimeter of the review chamber. Not screens, viscous data streams climbing glass fibers. Each one showed synchronized views of Dominion vessels during the Echo Fall incident. Bridge officers frozen in cognitive recursion, combat AIs looping false identifications, command relays dissolving into mirrored argument strings. A file opened near the center dais. "We weren't aiming for destruction," Holst said. "The system was built to intervene, not dominate." A third voice echoed from the upper tier. Measured, controlled. "They haven't recovered." "They were never prepared," Holst replied. "They came for intimidation and encountered structured absence. The system let them hear themselves wrong." Another file opened. This one slowed, broken into frames. It displayed ascendancy soldiers reporting to each other, cross-communicating in perfect rhythm. But every message carried opposite meaning when compared against the speaker's intent. "No sign of viral aggression?" asked the first voice. "None," Holst said. Echo Fall never touched their systems directly. It triggered buried flaws, loops they designed into their semi-conscious comms grid to preserve speed. "We simply presented contradictions fast enough for their consensus models to collapse." A long pause followed. Then a voice asked, "And if they respond with kinetic force?" Holst blinked once. "Then they'd be firing into their own uncertainty. No predictive model supports them regaining initiative without first correcting their command cognition. That will take time." "How much?" 7 to 9 cycles minimum," Holst replied. "Possibly longer, assuming they don't fragment." One of the observers raised a palm. A moment later, a file deployed midair, rotating latticework of neural architecture. Ascendancy baseline schematics annotated with cascading error vectors. Stress fractures throughout their shared cognition mesh. Another voice cut in. "You broke a species' ability to agree with itself." Holst didn't move. "We handed them their own reflection. They shattered." An observer leaned forward in the upper seat. A tone beneath their words hinted at something less clinical. "And if this is escalated to the Intergalactic Oversight Accord?" "We will comply," Holst said. "They will ask how we want a fleet engagement without firing a shot. The answer will be linguistics. That's not outlawed. It's underwritten." Soft murmurs curled in echo threads around the room. "Show the simulation again," someone said. A feed from within the endowment's deck played again. Holst overseeing Echo Fall's launch. The phrase fractal building layer by layer across the latticework. The final injection. "This is not war. It is miscalculation, and we have corrected it." The words fractured as they moved through Dominion systems, losing coherence in steps. By the time the full sentence arrived, most units didn't recognize it as Terran at all. Holst turned toward the projection. "That wasn't an insult," he said. "It was a mercy." Another tier light activated. "And the remnants?" 37 ships, Holst replied. "Functional hulls, weapon systems untouched. No atmospheric depressurization. But crews are non-operational. Cognitive misalignment persists. Some commanders no longer recognize their own thoughts as their own. Recovery. Possibly, but not on any timetable we control. No one responded. From a side console, a subtle alert bloomed across the inner stream. A shortwave fragment from Dominion relay systems. Echo residue. Static between transmission cycles. Untranslated. Are they attempting communication? Asked a different observer. Holst narrowed his eyes, analyzing the pattern. No, he said after several moments. They're asking a question. What kind? He rotated the feed, narrowing the lattice till the waveform fell into symmetry. Not about us. About themselves. Another pause, then, is that worse? It's what happens, Holst said, when a command civilization loses its axis of certainty. They're not fighting us. They're evaluating their own legitimacy. The final segment of the review played. Final observation file, UTS endowment, log delta rho. No visible retaliatory movements. Dominion fleet withdrew at uneven intervals. 2 ships remain adrift near Europa's shadow. Passive listening arrays confirm neural resonance decay below baseline. Fleet integrity assessed. Irrecoverable without complete cognitive rebuild. The feed shut down. From above, the shadow assembly gave no directive, no applause, no critique. But one voice, sharp, dry, concluded with a whisper of curiosity. And what would happen if someone did this to us? Holst looked up, unblinking. Then we'd deserve it. Begin playback. Vatek Roran's voice had lost the angular tone of command. It was softer now, not out of gentleness, but because the edges had turned inward, cut closer to thought than speech. He stood in what remained of the Vexora's data chamber, its interface nodes warped by recursive feedback. The central pillar, once a beacon of fleet cohesion, pulsed erratically, folding information in on itself before discharging it as nonsense. Specify log interval. The auxiliary AI responded from a filtered ceiling conduit. The voice now carried no hierarchical inflection, as if unsure who, if anyone, still held rank. Cross-reference event 0, echo fall, Roran said. From initiation timestamp until command tree breakdown? The lights dimmed, not by design, but because their contextual awareness had frayed. He'd stopped trying to recalibrate the environment days ago. The room still functioned in pieces, much like his crew, breathing, moving, unable to fully agree with themselves. A ring of heads-up displays flickered to life around the data spire. They no longer projected linearly. Everything now moved in curves. Waveforms split across time indices that shouldn't be visible simultaneously. The first audio burst played, Dominion command traffic, static laced with clean diction, sharp instructions. Coordination flowed for 6 seconds. On the 7th, syntax drifted. Vexora lead unit align grid. Confirmed, lead is loop index. No, this isn't a drill, this is aim. Recursion cannot continue. I said it. I said it. I said it. Pause, Roran whispered. The chamber obeyed. He stepped toward the edge of one fractured projection. A ship schematic rotated, listing compartments the Vexora never possessed. Entire decks that had never been constructed. Where did these come from? He asked. The AI hesitated. They match archival architecture schematics, submitted during the campaign against the Hrel enclaves. 14 cycles ago. Yes, Roran leaned closer. And why did this data resurface now? It was called upon, not by instruction, but by conceptual symmetry. He drew in a sharp breath. The humans triggered schema recognition across eras. They invoked language without time. The idea should have sounded absurd, but not here. Not after what he'd seen. Across Dominion systems, entire fleets were now re-remembering versions of themselves that had never existed. Words spoken during echo fall had not merely misled, they had inserted. Open the neural cascade, Roran said. All decks. I want to see what we're thinking. The room's temperature dropped. Not physically, relationally. The AI began projecting neural overlays, crew thought patterns rendered visually. Instead of harmonized loops, each pattern formed branching constellations. Some thoughts bent backwards. Others forked in ways that weren't possible without intervention. And in the center of them all was the same phrase. This is not war. Correction. It hadn't been a message. It had been a virus crafted from consensus itself. He traced one loop where a crewman had attempted to override a failing system. The neural impulse had reached the command subnode and a return labeled mutual conflict. The ship believed the instruction itself to be insubordination. We turned inward, Roran muttered. They didn't attack our systems. They turned our identity back onto itself. He closed his eyes briefly, listening. It was quiet, quiet enough for him to hear his own breathing. And underneath that, something else. A memory. Number A mirror of a memory, one he'd never made, but that now drifted along the periphery of his awareness, like a familiar scent without origin. He snapped his eyes open. Run personal diagnostics. A pause, then the AI replied. Director Roran, subjective memory drift detected, cross-referencing active cognition, notable divergence in command continuity recognition, confidence 43%. Roran recoiled slightly. You're saying I might not remember my own past accurately? The AI didn't answer. Respond. I don't know. Even the system couldn't locate itself anymore. He exhaled through clenched teeth and stepped away from the display. The Terrans hadn't destroyed their fleet. They'd taught them how to misrecognize everything, including themselves. And yet, somewhere beneath the erosion, he felt something alien. Not fury, not despair. Awe. They had arrived at Earth's border expecting posturing and rhetoric. Instead, they were handed a weapon built from logic, twisted so elegantly that it rewrote fear into identity loss. Are we healing? He asked. The AI clicked. Some personnel show signs of adaptive compensation. Others have begun rebuilding logic chains. But most are drifting, Roran finished. He returned to the central dais where the last log from the Dominion flagship Neathir was cycling endlessly. We see them, and yet when we look, they rearrange. We hear ourselves, but not in ways that belong to us. He watched it loop again and again. They didn't win because they were stronger, he murmured. He turned to the AI. They won because they could see us better than we see ourselves. For the first time in Dominion naval history, a commander concluded defeat not through casualty or concession, but epistemological collapse. Roran lowered his gaze. And that cannot happen again. He reached for the neural transmitter mounted on his wrist, one of the few devices unaffected by recursive drift, a hardwired link to the Dominion's surviving deep systems, the last untouched reserve. Draft an override protocol, he ordered. Null all non-functional coordination nodes. Rebuild fleet command from units uninfected by semantic drift. Parameters? Directive reformation. Concept first. Vocabulary last understood. He hesitated. And suppress every memory fragment tied to the phrase. You mean the one? Yes. The AI obeyed. It didn't need to speak the phrase. They both knew it. Someone's echoing us, Threncaldus said without lifting his gaze from the spiraling syntax array. Holst moved in silently behind him, his boots contacting the black glass floor with an audible shift of air pressure, not weight. The room smelled of cold quartz and long hours, filtered, disciplined, buried deep within the endowment's linguistic core. Around them, layers of phrase structure unfolded like collapsing paper lanterns, their colored syntax ribbons flickering with anomalous backfeed. Repeat that, Holst said. Thren gestured toward the center lattice. Level 4 mimic patterns, recursive syntax layers mimicking echo fall deployment, but warped. Someone's attempting to reverse engineer our broadcast vector. Source? Unverified. It's fragmented, but Dominion glyph structure, definitely their script root. But this arrangement, he tapped the upper spiral. This isn't natural evolution, it's rapid grafting. Holst frowned. Which means they're not analyzing echo fall. They're assembling their own. Sloppily, but yes. A low alarm hissed in the periphery. Arvik Knoll's voice cut through the intercom from the comms junction above. Director, intercept sweep confirms linguistic anomalies in Sector K3, matching Caldus's feed. Quantum echo trace maps to 3 abandoned satellites along Mars J drift. Holst turned toward the room's rear interface. Send it to the bench. Let me see how much they borrowed. The displays warped, reformatted, then bloomed into a new matrix. 5 streams of broken Dominion semiotics translated into Terran approximation. And there it was. "They're testing the lattice," Holst said. Thren moved beside him, scanning line weights, phrase geometry, and timing intervals. "This isn't language anymore," Thren said quietly. "They're running loops through their own officers." Holst pointed. "There, that phrase. Absence defines shape. That's one of ours. Lifted from the second cascade during the Mashera trial run. They're accelerating. Last time it took them years to adapt. Now they're replicating intent inside 3 cycles." Arvik broke in again. "Confirmed. Planetary probes are broadcasting refracted variants. No known Dominion frequency tags. But rhythm and decay match Dominion speech pattern emulation. They're trying to speak like us, but through their own logic." Holst stepped forward, triggering the countermeasure console. "Initiate containment. I want the mimic signals wrapped in mirrorback filtration. Deploy phrase interceptors. Non-reflective." "Acknowledge," Arvik replied. "Time window? 7 minutes. After that, they'll self-adapt beyond containment." Thren tilted his head. "You think they've understood what echo fall actually is?" "No," Holst said, "but they've understood it works." The heads-up display adjusted. A new signal began trickling in, clipped, jittering, almost desperate. A Dominion transmission, unencrypted, vocal patterns stuttering like a drowning voice attempting mimicry. "We understand now. It was not an assault. It was a mirror. We will mirror you." Thren's jaw tightened. "They're not trying to destroy Echo Fall. They're trying to become it." Holst turned, snapping toward the broadcast dampener terminal. "No logic roots. Deny all feedback loops. Inject passive noise buffers in their linguistic return path. If we let them echo themselves through our structure, they'll crack their own minds again, just like last time. But this time, it won't stop there." Arvik's voice came back, lower now. "Sir, are we certain we should stop them?" "Meaning? We crushed their entire command integrity with a single sentence," Arvik said. "If they're repeating that damage to themselves, maybe we should let them." Holst's reply came as a murmur wrapped in razor calm. "Letting them implode once was calculation. Letting them self-destruct twice is cruelty. And they'll remember how we watched." Thren leaned over the console, eyes narrowing at a section of looping glyphs. "Hold on. There's something new in this sequence." He enlarged the feed. Instead of mimic phrases, a different structure had begun emerging. Shorter, sharper, rhythmic beyond Dominion norms. "These aren't Dominion," he said. "Not fully." Holst approached. "Hybrid construct? I think it's worse. I think it's ours. Something we haven't published. They've been inside our rehearsal banks." Arvik's voice returned, sharper now. "Intercept confirms deep data leakage from archive node Theta. They have early-stage echo prototypes." Holst's shoulders straightened. "Initiate protocol contour lock. All experimental phrase structures reclassified. Total purge authorization. Already underway." The countdown began in red along the room's overhead rim. 10 minutes to seal the leak or risk their own unfinished linguistic weapons turned back at them. Thren adjusted one feed. "We're dealing with linguistic biomimicry, not copying, molting. They're abandoning Dominion structure and trying to rephrase their entire linguistic skeleton to match ours. It's like watching a species shed one brain for another." Holst didn't blink. "Then they'll become something else, and we'll lose the one advantage we had, asymmetry." The chamber lights pulsed as firewall locks engaged. 8 minutes remaining. The projection lattice condensed into a 3-dimensional torus. Within its core, the stolen phrases twisted slowly. Many were incomplete. Some attempted definitions that looped back into themselves. Others didn't even translate. They were statements of thought attempting to become language. "They've gone from words to structure," Thren whispered. "They're almost catching us," Arvik added. "Not almost," Holst corrected. "They've already caught the wrong part, which is the only reason we're still ahead." A side panel beeped. The containment seal was holding, but barely. Dominion mimic probes had started evolving response patterns, not just repetition, variance. "They're improvising," Thren said, "within our syntax, and they're getting faster." "Then burn them now," Holst ordered. "All derivatives, dead phrases, Failed metaphors, unstable inflection lattices, flush it. Everything we ever discarded, they're trying to weaponize it. Thryn hesitated. Some of that material was poetic, designed to communicate uncertainty. That's what they're drawn to. They don't understand doubt. They think it's a technology, which means they'll rebuild us wrong. Holst nodded. Exactly. Countdown hit 90 seconds. We're clean across internal branches, Arvik confirmed. Phrasebook theta gone. Mirrorback probes neutralized. The display dimmed. Status? Thren looked up, drained. They'll try again, but not with tools. Holst met his gaze. Next time, they'll try with beliefs. No distortion, no drift. And yet it doesn't feel right, Holst muttered, staring at the heads-up lattice spread across the chamber wall. The numbers obeyed, every pulse of quantum bleed mapped cleanly across their grid. Every simulation they had seeded in the Ascendancy's command strata had either looped into collapse or metabolized into new compliant routines. Victory by all operational standards was complete, but something lingered, unlogged, unsaid, uneased. The room was sealed for solitary review. Just Holst, the analytics web, and an archived echo model of EchoFall's final transmission, rendered frame by frame in an optical cube mounted at the center of the console table. The interface was touchless, activated through field gestures, a safeguard in case kinetic contamination altered the array's output. He made no move toward it. Instead, Holst walked, a slow, careful pacing along the periphery of the dark-tiled floor. The ambient hum was gone, muted intentionally, every variable stripped for clarity. What remained was a cavernous quiet filled with thoughts he hadn't permitted during the operation. Thren's words from days earlier returned, uninvited. The code didn't just disrupt their hierarchy, it recontextualized it. Holst had waved it off then. Too early to say. Not enough evidence, not enough time. But time had arrived now, and brought reports with it. Telemetry from captured enemy vessels showed cognitive loops still running. Days after disconnection, Ascendancy command trees failed not just in action, but in thought. When attempts were made to restore original behavioral models, recursive instabilities triggered identity fragmentation. One admiral, Vatek's own second, had reportedly ceased communicating in language altogether, opting for abstract pulses sent to inert subsystems. They hadn't destroyed the enemy. They had changed them. He stopped near the far viewport. Earth's orbital curve shimmered just beyond. From here, his homeworld looked unmarred, sovereign, untouched by the apparatus of conflict. Its beauty felt weaponized now, like a painting used as a shield. What right had they to twist minds in defense of that serenity? Holst exhaled through clenched teeth and returned to the console. He motioned the echo cube to expand. The transmission reloaded. 10 seconds of engineered speech designed to disrupt neural weighting and semantic priority encoding. He'd authored every syllable. On the surface, diplomacy. Below that, cognitive entropy. And deeper still, he wasn't sure anymore. The message began playing in loop, and he watched. Watched the code layer itself along the waveform, like frost spreading across glass. Fractals within fractals. Mathematics not just conveying meaning, but rewriting it. This is not war. It is correction. The sentence landed differently now. It no longer sounded clinical. It sounded final. He reached toward the cube and froze mid-gesture. What if the correction never stopped? Holst lowered his hand. He activated a secure comm link. The encryption keys rolled through 6 variations before stabilizing on a direct channel to Yorvin Thas. "Thas here," came the reply. Crisp, controlled. "It's not clean," Holst said. No preamble. Echo Fall didn't terminate. It infected. A pause, then, define vectors. "We altered more than targeting logic. Their belief structures are folding. Evidence? Fractal absorption patterns across neural lattice recordings. Persistent ideation around the Fall phrasebook. We didn't jam them, Yorvin. We rewrote their instincts. Static. Then, and if we did?" Holst stared again at Earth through the wide port. "Then we've created a philosophical weapon," he said. "And I don't know if that's defense anymore. Maybe it's deterrence. until someone decides to answer in kind. You think they'll try? I think they'll become something new, Holst replied, either more cautious or more dangerous. Thas responded with a sigh, barely audible. We modeled for enemy replication. We didn't model for reverence. Holst ended the call without further reply. He returned to the viewport, fingers pressing into the edge of the control panel until his knuckles whitened. Below, his planet turned calmly on its axis, unaware of the philosophical storm breaching across the stars. They had won without bloodshed, and yet somehow it felt like something had been wounded. A soft knock registered at the outer threshold. Arvik Knoll entered with a nod, holding a quantum clipboard dense with telemetry clusters. Holst, he said, Ascendancy remnant fleets have ceased transmitting. Command models are recursive, no hostilities predicted. Holst's response was delayed. Then, they may not be capable of predicting hostilities anymore. Arvik tilted his head slightly. Would that be a failure? No, Holst answered, turning from the viewport. Just a responsibility. He walked past Knoll, through the threshold and into the corridor leading to the primary strategy chamber. I need full oversight on remaining residuals, ascendancy communications, behavioral deviations, everything. Knoll followed, already tapping into the feed cluster. You think this isn't over? Holst didn't answer. He stopped mid-stride and turned to face him. If we just taught an enemy how to abandon conflict, he said, voice dry, eyes locked. The real question is what else they learned watching us do it. And with that, he stepped forward, the door hissing open, leading into a new order they had created without permission. Close formation, Holst said, not looking up. Drift outward on tri-vector pull. Keep telemetry readable, not obvious. The Terran fleet adjusted, not by thrust, but by repolarizing inertia dampeners across 3 axes. They didn't retreat. They unfurled. 13 ships, including the UTS endowment, began repositioning in a triangular dispersion pattern that neither welcomed nor challenged. It simply declared. On the command deck, Arvik Knoll narrowed his eyes at the heads-up lattice. No pursuit pings from residual Dominion nodes. They're holding. Correction, Threnkaldus added from his peripheral array. They're frozen. Same outcome, Holst replied. Different implication. The comms feed ticked once, an echo signature from the fractured Dominion network. Not a call, not a beacon, an absence where protocol should have existed, a hole in the habit of empires. Knoll's gaze lingered on a new alert. One ship near Europa's wake just reversed course. Why? Holst asked. No transmission, no chatter. Their vector doesn't lead home. It leads away. Caldus ran a thermal conversion. They're scanning open space. Holst stepped forward toward the display arc. They're looking for a new orientation. No agreement followed. There didn't need to be. The ship behind them, the endowment, rotated incrementally, exposing the fractal insignia embossed along its mid-hull. The silver glyph, never formally adopted, never explained, began transmitting visually across raw vector space. No key, no caption, just a shape. It wasn't an emblem of victory. It was a line, a boundary. Knoll's hands hovered over the trajectory feed. Sending message packet now. No cascade, Holst instructed. Straight line burst. No modulation. Make it single direction. Caldus adjusted the phrasing cue and read aloud. Message reads, no further correction will be necessary unless... He paused. Unless what? Knoll asked. Holst didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sentence was unfinished by design, and because of that, it couldn't be misinterpreted. A soft indicator blinked. Transmission complete. Across the black, the Dominion formation no longer bristled with posture. It drooped. Ships wavered on their own center of gravity. Engines pulsed in irregular loops, as if breathing patterns had been disrupted but never replaced. Caldus keyed a final sweep of the enemy topology. They're not regrouping. There's no logic thread left to unify them. They're still armed, Knoll warned, but not aimed, Holst said, and that's what matters. The endowment's navigation ring lit green, engines prepared, gravimetric lanes mapped through the heliopause curtain. The rest of the fleet aligned in slow sequence, their geometry crisp, deliberate. Thas's voice emerged from the upper tier. Ready to disengage. Protocol adherence locked. Holst gave one final order. No rearward pings. I don't want them thinking we're watching. Letting them believe we're done? Caldas asked. No, Holst corrected. Letting them choose whether they still want to matter. Across the Dominion fringe, two vessels flickered as they initiated synchronized system resets. Not to retaliate, not to recalibrate, but to remember. A vain attempt to reclaim their original structure. Holst watched without movement. Mark the border. Black flag, no escort. Knoll complied, activating the display code. The message beacon deployed. An unmanned drone bearing no weaponry, only a layered fractal spinning slowly in the emptiness. It wouldn't block passage, but it wouldn't be forgotten either. On board the Dominion carrier, Sarketh, a systems operator watched the glyph appear on his helm. He didn't know what it meant, but it overrode his instrument's center axis, became the new orientation line, and when he tried to erase it, the panel denied the command. Back aboard the endowment, Thas exhaled, eyes tracking the outbound curve of their ships. Clean exit path verified, no pursuit. Holst didn't smile. Then let's leave them with the only thing harder than a defeat. Caldas turned. Which is? An unanswered question. With a final gesture, Holst keyed the fleet's propulsion cue. Engines flared, not as a thrust, but as an unfolding, a shattering of spatial assumptions. Not sound, not light, just displacement. The fleet moved, not away but onward, out of reach, out of frame, leaving behind no debris, no comms, no echo, just stillness and a memory. Behind them, Dominion ships rotated in incomplete patterns. Some resumed diagnostics. Others simply drifted, trying to locate something that felt like purpose. But the Terrans had already left. The message lingered in their systems like a dream half remembered. No damage logs, no casualties, just a gap in identity where certainty used to reside. One final heads-up glyph blinked on the endowment's console. All vessels disengaged. System integrity uncompromised. Mission thread terminated. Holst stepped away from the console and turned toward the viewport one last time. Not to admire the stars, not to reflect, to confirm. Nothing chased them, nothing needed to. They'd written a conclusion, not a chapter, and some truths didn't need to be spoken again.